There's no
All right, let's get going here. All right. We'll be praying for our kiddos who are traveling the next several days. They're going to Centerville, Tennessee. Camp Maribah. Anybody ever heard of Camp Maribah? Anybody ever heard of Centerville, Tennessee? All right, we are thinking again about the Psalms and how to read the Psalms, how to understand the Psalms. There are, of course, a number of different types of Psalms, and that's really one of the things that will make them make more sense to ask the question, okay, what's the type of Psalm here? So far we've talked about hymns, which generally speaking are Psalms of praise. We do want to put a little qualification on this when we start talking about categorizing Psalms. Some of them are predominantly one type of psalm, but then they're a little bit of another, right? And so we need to kind of qualify that statement that sometimes there's some cross categorization that's necessary, but for the most part, the Psalms fall into one of about 5 different categories. Today we're going to look at the idea of thanksgiving psalms, psalms of confidence, psalms of remembrance, and then kingship psalms. And then we'll be done with our different types of genres. Look at Psalm 56, verse 12. Psalm 56, verse 12. A book that if you really want to get into reading the Psalms, one of the things I suggested doing was mixing up the versions that you read from. And I find that to be very, very helpful, particularly if you find some works that are written by literary kind of geared folks who are kind of geared toward literature. One of the books that I have enjoyed very, very much lately is this translation by Robert Alter, Book of Psalms by Robert Alter. And this whole book is just the Book of Psalms. And it's really neat because each page has 3 or 4 verses, and this is his own translation, and then he gives some commentary on each of these as well, and some things that you probably wouldn't see other places because he's approaching it as a poet and a translator instead of necessarily a biblical scholar. And so from a language standpoint, it's a really interesting read, and I like to mix it up with some of my other ones. But if you're in Psalm 56, let's talk about these idea of thanksgiving psalms. Of course, reviewing the lament form in the Psalter naturally leads to a consideration of songs of thanks. That's kind of the other end of the spectrum. If you have a psalm that, of course, is a lament, and there is a great deal of grief associated with that, then the other end of that spectrum is the psalms of thanksgiving. And, one of the things that we've talked about is the idea of how the Psalms cover this spectrum of human emotion. Because there are times when we are in lament. We are in seasons of grief in our lives, and then there are other times when we're in seasons of thanksgiving. And I really think a familiarity with the Psalms is necessary because it can be really frustrating to say, you know what, I really need some help with this. And then to open the Psalms and come to one of those that, you know, is about my enemy and breaking their teeth out. You know, and that's not what you need right now. So I think sometimes we need to increase our familiarity with the Psalms so they can help us with these emotional needs and this emotional spectrum that we find ourselves on, which is basically life. A Thanksgiving psalm is praise to God for answered prayer. Praise to God for answered prayer. That's one of the things that I think we are a little deficient in, and I notice this in myself, that, you know, I may pray 3 or 4 days that something will go well, or that somebody will be safe, or, you know, pray for the kids going on the retreat and pray for the retreat for days, and then when they get back and all those prayers have been answered, then it's on to the next thing, right? And one of the things that I think the Psalms of Thanksgiving remind us is that as important as it is for us to ask God for things, it's also as important for us to thank Him for those answered prayers that we offer. Psalm 56, verse 12. You're going to notice we'll just look at a few little examples here of these psalms of gratitude or thanksgiving. Psalm 56, verse 12. Vows made to you are binding upon me, O God. I will render praises to you, for you have delivered me from death. Have you not kept my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? So notice that there, how he as many psalms as there are of need, an expression of need, then there are many others of thanksgiving as well. Look at Psalm 34 and verse 1. Psalm 34 and verse 1. And I guess one of the things that we ought to note about this genre classification is very often the best way to figure out what it is look at that first verse of the psalm and see what the first verse of the psalm says. Often that is the biggest hint to what type of psalm it is. For instance, Psalm 34 verse 1, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. So this is a psalm of thanksgiving. Let me read it to you from Alter's translation. 34 and 1. You can read it. I want you to read along with it from yours, and then notice this. We do have a superscription over this one, a Psalm of David. Remember that that might be best read a Davidic psalm. A psalm of David when he pretended madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. For David, when he altered his good sense before Abimelech, who banished him, and he went away. Let me bless the Lord at all times. Always his praise is in my mouth. In the Lord do I glory. Let the lowly hear and rejoice. Extol the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name one and all. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and from all that I dreaded he saved me. They looked to him, and they beamed, and their faces were no longer dark. When the lowly calls, God listens, and from all his straits rescues him. The Lord's messenger encamps around those who fear him and sets them free. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy the man who shelters in him. Fear the Lord, O his holy ones, for those who fear him know no want. Lions are wretched in hunger, but the Lord's seekers lack no good. Come, sons, listen to me. The Lord's fear will I teach you. Whoever the man desiring life, who loves long days to see good, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Swerve from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The Lord's eyes are on the righteous, and his ears to their outcry. The Lord's face is against evildoers. Cry out, and the Lord hears, and from all their straits he saves them. Near is the Lord to the brokenhearted, and the crushed in spirit he rescues. Many evils of the righteous man, yet from all them the Lord will save him. He guards all his bones, not a single one is broken. Evil will kill the wicked, and the righteous man's foes will bear guilt. The Lord ransoms his servants' lives. They will bear no guilt, all who shelter in him. So very often that first, certainly this is a loaded psalm and a lot going on in it. But very often that very first word, that very first verse is going to key you off about what type of psalm it is. Look at 32:1 while you're close there. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. Looking at 34 and 32, what do you notice about a different, perhaps, circumstance of thanksgiving there? What's the difference in those two circumstances of thanksgiving? You know, one is for a very physical deliverance, right? It's for a physical circumstances out of which you've been delivered. David, of course, with Abimelech was in physical danger. He was fleeing from Saul. He had fled to the Philistines. So he was in danger from Saul. He was in danger from the Philistines. He was surrounded on every hand. And in 34, he's praising God for that physical deliverance. What's going on in 32? What kind of deliverance is he thanking God for there? Spiritual deliverance. Yeah, this is, we're told it's a psalm of David, a contemplation. Again, look at what that marginal note means. But you also see here, I think this is one of the psalms of repentance. This is where David has been in sin, and now that sin has been confessed, and now the deliverance that he's thanking God for is a spiritual deliverance. And both of those things are not only necessary, but also necessary for us to be thankful for. So often our gratitude is about physical things, or even our prayer about physical things. Sometimes when I meet with elders of churches in different places, or talk to church leaders in different places, they talk about the idea of, we pray for so much physical sickness. We pray for people's physical conditions. And we should, I think, that there's good scriptural reason for us to do that. But one of the things that these leaders note is that we have a tendency not to pray as often for people's spiritual situations. And what the psalmist shows us here on these 2 pages is that there is spiritual deliverance that's needed, and there's physical deliverance needed. And then there is the follow-up gratitude for both of those situations. Look at chapter 30, or Psalm 30, and verse 4. Verse 1 again, I will extol you, O Lord, for you have lifted me up. You have not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried out to you, and you healed me. So notice that what has preceded this psalm is a prayer. God, deliver me. God, save me. And so this psalm, the circumstance of this psalm, is a psalm of thanksgiving for God's deliverance. And what we could probably do, if we wanted to, is we could probably find counterparts to these psalms where the psalmist is asking for the deliverance, and then we could couple it with another one where he says, thank you for hearing my prayer, thank you for delivering me. Because that is the condition of many of these psalms as well. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have lifted me up. You have not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried out to you, and you healed me. O Lord, you brought my soul up from the grave. You have kept me alive that I should not go down to the pit. Look at 18, verses 5 and 6. And I'm looking at the opening verses as well, because again, I think that kind of gives you a good hint about what the psalm is going to be about. I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust. And then look down in verse 5 and 6. The sorrows of Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried out to my God. He heard my voice from his temple, and my cry came before him even to his tears. One of the characteristics of these songs of thanksgiving is that statement where the psalmist is going to say, I cried out to God, and he answered me. I cried out for deliverance, and he delivered me. I cried out for salvation, and he saved me. So that's characteristic of these psalms of thanksgiving. 18:16. While we're there, look at this line. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He also brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. So there's this statement of a prayer that was offered, a prayer that was answered, and then gratitude that is being described because of the Lord's action in response to these prayers. And what a beautiful, beautiful psalm that is, right? He sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of many waters. What's the imagery there? He sent from above. Saw a funny meme the other day. It was when you're a lifeguard at the Summer Olympics, right? And there's this guy sitting there, and there's the swimmers out there, and like, this guy's going to, he's going to save these guys? Probably not. It was kind of funny because you could tell that the lifeguard was bored out of his mind. And the swimmers who were there were, just paragons of physical perfect. I mean, they were specimens. And here's this lifeguard sitting up there, watching. But that's the imagery of this, right? Almost the lifeguard imagery. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. And you think about a churning waters. I've noticed several things about riptides at the beaches lately, and seen several pictures where it shows when you see this water's really, really dangerous. And think about that. Think about that in a spiritual sense. Think about being sucked under. Think about struggling and trying to get to the top and get that breath and realizing that you can't save yourself. This is, and then all of a sudden somebody reaches in and saves you. And that's the imagery here. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. And notice what he did. He also brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. So he takes me out of these churning waters in which I am drowning, and he sets me on solid, stable, dry ground. A broad place. There's no danger anywhere in sight, right? It's a broad place, and it is secure. You ever been in one of those situations where you said, if I ever get to dry land again, or if I ever get home again, or if I ever get out of the air again and get on dry ground, what are you going to do? I'm going to never do that again. But I don't know that I've ever done this. I know that I've felt like it. I wouldn't be surprised if I had done it. I have done it in my head so many times that I can't decide whether I have actually done it or not. And that is to get down and kiss the ground. I've done it in my head, so I can't recall if I've actually done it. I think I have done it before. Maybe you've been on a long trip for weeks and weeks. You just wanted to get home, and you get home and you're just so thankful. And it happens with maybe a bad flight or a bad ocean-going trip or something that you just say, I just want to get on dry land again. I just want to be on the ground. And that's kind of the imagery here. I can see the psalmist who he says, God plucked me out of these churning waters, out of these many waters, and he put me on a dry place. And then the response is almost to kiss the ground because you've been saved. But then that kissing of the ground is worship itself, that it is gratitude itself to God who has delivered them. So what a beautiful imagery there. Let's look at some psalms of confidence. Okay, so we've got worship or hymn, and there is a distinction in these psalms of thanksgiving, because the very specific circumstances is I have prayed for this, and God has delivered me in response to my prayer. And so it is thanksgiving, not just God is great, God is good, that sort of thing. That I have specifically asked for deliverance, and God has given it, and so therefore I am thankful to it. Psalms of confidence express prospectively a confidence in God. I know God's going to do this. The Psalms of gratitude or thanksgiving are retrospective. I've asked for God to do this, God did it, therefore I'm grateful. Psalms of confidence are, I know that God is going to do this. Look, for instance, at Psalm 46 in verse 1. This is our next category, these Psalms of confidence, or Psalms of confidence in God. Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Notice how that's prospective. We will not fear. Therefore, we will not fear, even though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. I love that phrase right there. The word removed there is literally changed. What's the most stable, sturdy thing that you can think of? We just mentioned it, right? The ground. You ought to be able to count on the ground, right? And he says, hey, if the ground under us moves, God's not going to. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, even though the earth be shaken or removed or changed, though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. There is a river whose stream shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her just at the break of dawn. The nations raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. Notice all the things that move in this. The waters, the nations, the ground, the mountains. What doesn't move? God doesn't move. He is a very present help, our refuge and a strength. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has made desolations in the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, cuts the spear in two, burns the chariot in the fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. What a great psalm Psalm 46 is. His confidence, the psalmist frequently expresses his trust in God's goodness. His confidence in God is present as he sings hymns of joy and as he mourns. Look at 52:8 while we're right here, and then we'll go to Psalm 3 after this. Psalm 52, verse 8. So even when he's mourning, that there's this expression of confidence in God. I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise you forever because you have done it in the presence of your saints. I will wait on your name, for it is good. Psalm 3, verse 3. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me. That imagery of lifting up your head. That God lifts up your head. That however many enemies you have, what matters is that God is on your side. And look how that psalm begins in 3. Lord, how they have increased who troubled me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me. Arise, O Lord, save me, O God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. That emphasis on the hill and the holy hill is significant. And we're going to see as we get particularly to the kingship psalms that The Temple Mount itself, the city of Jerusalem, particularly the hill of Zion, is also involved in these blessings in many of these psalms. There is a temptation, I think, to kind of equate this with classical mythology. You know, when we think about, you know, if I ask you where, you know, Zeus lived, you'd probably tell me, you know, on Mount Olympus. And you know, there is, when you read this, we're not careful, that idea about God living on a mountain. And that's not the point. The point of this is the association of God's blessing with Zion and Jerusalem and those things, the physical places that were the inhabitants of the Israelites, where God's presence was ensconced, so to speak. All right, let's see. At least 9 psalms, Psalm 11, 16, 23, 27, 62, 91, 121, 125, 131, are bound together as psalms of confidence. Let's look at a couple of those. We know what 23 says, so we won't look at it, but look at 11. 11:1. In the Lord I put my trust. All right, when you read that, you should probably think, that's a confidence psalm, right? Now, look at 10. Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? You know, that's a different type of psalm. In you, O Lord, I put my trust. Look at 16. Well, right here. Preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust. O my soul, you have said to the Lord, you are my Lord. My goodness is nothing apart from you. Look at 27. We know what 23 says, so we'll skip it. Although, let's look at 23 as a psalm of confidence. Here's why. One of my favorite things about Psalm 23 is, generally speaking, it is about the action of God. It's what God does. But there are 3 statements of will that are made in Psalm 23. And I think they're very, very pivotal to understanding Psalm 23. We think about it as God does this, God does this, God does this, God does this. Well, that's what the psalm is about. But then there are 3 statements of will in that psalm as well. The Lord is my shepherd, I will not want. Okay? So that statement is important. The Lord is my shepherd, I will not want. And I have often thought of these. The natural way of reading that is to say, well, because God loads me up with so many good things, I'm never going to be in want. But what if you tilt that statement just a little bit, and it becomes a statement of my intent to be contented, right? That the Lord's blessings are going to be enough. That whatever the Lord gives me is going to be enough. It's not that the Lord is just going to pile stuff on. It's whatever the Lord gives me, I will be content. I will not want, whatever it is. And that really goes to what Paul will say in Philippians chapter 4. I've learned in whatever state I am to be content. So what if this is not just a statement of recognition of what God does, but a willful statement of whatever God does, I'm going to be content with that. Whatever He gives me, I'm going to be content. And then the second statement of will in the psalm is in verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Notice those words of confidence. I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. See, there's a second statement of will. And notice the confidence that it expresses. I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And then the third statement of will is in verse 6. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You've got 3 I wills here in this. And these are all statements of confidence. Look at the statements of confidence. I will not want. I will not fear. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I mean, you don't get many more grand expressions of confidence than those 3 things. And of course, what's around those three things is all the things that God is going to do. All right? 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked came against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and foes, they stumbled and they fell. Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may rise against me, in this I will be confident. I will be confident. So these confident psalms are wonderful, and it helps to know what they are. It helps to know how to recognize them. It helps to to know when we need this particular thing. Look at 62. 62. Truly, my soul waits silently for God. From Him comes my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. Wonderful expression of confidence. 91. Notice how you see that you can pick this up generally in the first verse of the psalm. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I will trust. So have you noticed some kind of consistent language that goes through these confident psalms? Well, we've read probably 6 or 7 of them already. Is there an imagery that seems pretty consistent? That imagery of refuge and fortress is pretty consistent. Of the 6 or 7 we read, it's been in almost every one of them somehow. This idea of a rock, a cleft, a fortress, a place where I can take shelter or refuge is in almost of these. He is my refuge and my fortress. Let's see if that holds up. 121. It's already been in several of them, so I may show you 3 more, and it may not be in those, and so I'll have egg on my face at that point. But notice 121. Oh, I love 121. I will lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence come my help. My help comes from the Lord who has made heaven and earth. Again, this reference to hills. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps you will not slumber. Remember when Elijah is on the great scene where Elijah is on Mount Carmel and he's having the contest with the prophets of Baal. One of my favorite scenes in all of Scripture is when Elijah is taunting all the prophets of Baal, right? And he says at one point, maybe your God's on a trip. Maybe he's taking a journey and he'll be back. It's like, maybe he's running an errand. Maybe he went to the store or whatever. At one point he says, you might need to speak up a little bit because he could be asleep. And of course, they start getting louder and carrying on. They start cutting themselves and passing out and all kinds of stuff. But that idea of you might need to wake him up. The psalmist says you're never going to have to wake up. God does not slumber. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. What a wonderful, wonderful psalm there is. 125. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds His people from this time forth forevermore. So that mountain imagery there, again, the fortress imagery, very prolific in these passages. Very obvious. 131, last one we'll look at in this category. Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my eyes lofty. neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor with things too profound for me. Surely I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with his mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. What a picturesque psalm. Isn't that a picturesque psalm? You can see this one. You can see this one played out every time that you're with little children. That this idea of them wanting the arms of their mother, that they know that there is safety and refuge there, and that's the imagery. Surely I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with his mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord. This idea of finding that security. So these confident psalms are wonderful psalms. And it's the tone of these psalms that really, more than anything, lets us know that this is a psalm of confidence. Now let's talk about psalms of remembrance. Psalms of remembrance. Any comments, questions on the confident psalms or the Thanksgiving psalms yet? Now let's try to get our psalms of remembrance in. Psalms of remembrance are those in which God's past acts of redemption are the focus of attention. In such psalms, a series of God's acts will be recounted. We'll look at a couple of these as well. Some of these particularly go and relate to a specific biblical event. Some of them go through a long series of biblical events. The Exodus, the conquest of Canaan. And it'll go through all of these events. Very often, it will include not just the works of God, but it will also include the failures of His people or the success of His people. You know, when they complained against God, He did this. When they cried out because they were thirsty, He opened the rocks and gave them water out of the rocks. And so sometimes, and it's just like reading the narrative itself. That there's good and there's bad that comes out of it. That sometimes God's people are faithful and other times they are not. But of course the emphasis on all of them is that God is faithful. That God is faithful. And that's where the comfort lies, right? You know, my comfort in God is not that I've always been faithful. My comfort in God is that He has. And I'm thankful that He is faithful when we are not. There's a well, I won't get into that. Anyway, so let's look at a couple of these. Look at Psalm 78. Actually, while we're here, don't go back that far. Let's look at 136, since we're this close. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His mercy endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, to the God of gods, for His mercy endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, for His mercy endures forever. One of the things that you're going to see in Psalms like this is a lot of times I believe, and scholars are up in the air about it, but many will suggest that a psalm like 134, or like 136 here, was a psalm that was meant to be recited in an assembly, and then it would have a responsive line as well. So for instance, if you look at verse 9, the moon and stars to rule by day, for His mercy endures forever. 26 times in this particular psalm, you have this line, His mercy endures forever. And the thought is, and it's been suggested, I think it's pretty good, is that what would happen is you would have some man stand up, maybe he would be a priest, maybe he wouldn't be, but he would begin the recitation of this psalm, and every time he got to the place where you're supposed to say His mercy endures forever, then the congregation was to kick in that line. So it was responsive. He would say something, the congregation would say something back. What's the benefit of that? Yeah, that you're laying claim to the story as well, right? It's not just something that's being read to you. You're involved in the story, right? What else? I've noticed this, I'm noticed this about preaching and moving while you preach. It's very similar to when you're driving and you get really tired when you're driving and your eyes get locked on a specific thing. And when your eyes get locked on a specific thing, I think they call it highway hypnosis or something like that, and you just really start to... I've noticed that people pay more attention to a speaker when he's not standing in a specific spot, but he's moving. I've also noticed that if I see two folks who I used to do it with kids, I don't do it with adults, but if I saw two kids and they're sitting on the front row whispering or whatever, I just walk over in their general direction. All of a sudden, they're paying attention better than anybody in the place. What I think that does is that it not only involves, but it means I'm keeping up with the story. It means that I have a part of it, that I have a part to play in this, that it's not a spectator sport. Worship is not a spectator sport. And I think that as we see this, the acts of God recounted and the congregation asked to come in and play their part in the retelling of the story, His mercy endures forever, then it does all of those things. It invites them into the story. It engages them so they're not lost. They're not sitting there asleep. They're not, expecting to be entertained, but they are participating in this story. I have read this particular psalm with the congregation before and asked them to do that. And it's a pretty fun exercise. And when you get to the New Testament and you see some of Paul's sermons, some of Peter's sermons, Stephen's sermon particularly, very often those sermons are very similar to Psalm 134, that they are a retelling of Israelite history. And where Christ fits into that. So I think a great deal of Israelite education was involved with these historical or remembrance psalms. Let's look at a few verses of this real quick, and then I'll let you be done. Let me start in verse 10, for instance. To him who struck Egypt in their firstborn, for his mercy endures forever, and brought out Israel from among them, for his mercy endures forever. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, for his mercy endures forever. Kind of imagine it in that way, that there's this responsive reading going on. And what we're doing is we're remembering the great acts of God. We're remembering perhaps our successes. We're remembering perhaps our failures. But what mostly we're remembering is God's faithfulness. And we repeat that with this phrase, his mercy endures forever. And there are a number of these psalms as well. So that gets us through the genres of the Psalms, and we've got, I think, one more week on this particular subject, and then we'll have a new class beginning in August, if I have been informed correctly. All right, if you are leaving, hope you have a great week. If you're staying with us, we're glad you are.